She wore them like they were already hers, but behind palace walls, someone was allegedly counting every missing sapphire one by one. The moment whispers started spreading through royal corridors that pieces connected to Queen Elizabeth's deeply personal sapphire collection had quietly drifted toward Queen Camilla's private circle. The atmosphere inside the monarchy reportedly changed overnight, and according to explosive royal chatter, one woman refused to stay silent. Princess Anne allegedly stepped in with fury, pressure, and a demand that shook the entire inner circle. Because this was not just about jewelry. These were the sapphires of a queen who ruled for 70 years. Stones soaked in memory, symbolism, grief, and power. And now, according to insiders, Anne believed parts of that legacy were slipping into the wrong hands. For years, the public saw Queen Elizabeth's sapphire pieces as elegant royal decorations, but inside the palace, they represented something far deeper. The collection was emotional, personal, untouchable. The Sapphire Suite began as a wedding gift from King George VI to his daughter in 1947, a father handing over precious jewels to a young princess about to enter a future none of them could fully predict. Over time, Queen Elizabeth expanded the suite herself, personally redesigning parts of it and adding the famous Belgian sapphire tiara. That detail matters, because unlike inherited royal pieces passed down automatically through generations, this was something she intentionally built with her own vision. She wore those sapphires during milestone moments of her reign, especially during her Sapphire Jubilee portrait in 2017, where the message felt almost deliberate. Those jewels were not random accessories. They were visual proof of continuity, proof of monarchy, proof of Elizabeth herself. Queen Elizabeth II, and then came the shift after her death in September 2022. Public mourning filled television screens, but behind closed palace doors, another process reportedly began immediately. Inheritance, access, possession, positioning. Queen Camilla rapidly emerged wearing some of Elizabeth's most iconic sapphire pieces, especially the Belgian sapphire tiara. She appeared in it at major state banquets and diplomatic receptions within months. To the public, it looked ceremonial, respectful even. But according to royal whispers, Anne saw something else entirely. She allegedly believed Camilla was not merely honoring the late queen, she was visually replacing her. That difference changed everything. The tension reportedly became even more explosive because the sapphire collection was already tied to deeper palace rivalries involving inheritance, status, and influence. Rumors circulated for years that certain royal jewels were quietly intended for Catherine, Princess of Wales, rather than Camilla's side of the family. That alone allegedly created resentment beneath the surface. So when stories began surfacing that supplementary sapphire pieces, less photographed, less cataloged, more personal, were somehow being accessed through Camilla's private household, alarm bells started ringing inside Anne's circle. And suddenly, another name entered the center of the storm. Laura Lopes. Not a royal, no title, no constitutional role, no official position in the monarchy whatsoever. Just the queen's daughter living a private life outside formal royal structures. And that distinction reportedly became the core issue. Because while Laura has long remained connected socially to royal life through Camilla, insiders allegedly believed there was a line that should never be crossed. Royal jewels connected to Queen Elizabeth's reign were never supposed to quietly migrate into private untitled households, especially not pieces tied so emotionally to the late queen herself. That is where Anne reportedly exploded, because unlike other royals known for diplomacy and careful smiles, Princess Anne has spent decades building a reputation as the monarchy's hardest realist. Direct, ruthless about protocol, emotionally disciplined, and above all, fiercely loyal to her mother. Anne was with Queen Elizabeth during her final 24 hours. She escorted her coffin across Scotland. She inherited not only jewelry and memories, but responsibility. Palace insiders allegedly say Anne views herself as the guardian of Elizabeth's legacy, especially the symbolic pieces tied to her reign. And to Anne, those sapphires were sacred. What makes this entire story feel even more suspicious is the phrase now circulating among royal commentators, hidden sapphire collection. Because the public never actually saw the complete inventory of Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry archive. Reports estimate she owned hundreds of pieces, but only a fraction were publicly documented. Many remain tucked away in private estates like Balmoral and Sandringham, rarely photographed and quietly rotated within trusted royal circles. That secrecy created the perfect environment for confusion, speculation, and alleged movement behind palace walls. If pieces disappeared from official rotation, who would even know? According to insiders, Anne would know, and that is exactly why people believe she acted. Sources now claim Anne privately confronted those connected to Lower Lopes regarding certain sapphire pieces and demanded their return to the active royal household. Not with public screaming, not with media leaks, but with something far colder and more dangerous: royal authority backed by moral certainty. Because publicly exposing the issue would risk humiliating the king's own wife, and that creates an impossible palace dilemma. How do you recover potentially sensitive royal assets without confirming scandal? That is reportedly the razor-thin line Anne has been walking behind the scenes. King Charles III, the deeper this story goes, the more dangerous it starts to feel for the monarchy itself, because this is no longer just about whether a few sapphire pieces were allegedly moved quietly through private royal channels. It is about control, legacy, ownership of Queen Elizabeth's image after death. And according to Palace Whispers, Princess Anne allegedly realized something terrifying: if nobody drew a hard line now, the symbolic treasures connected to her mother's reign could slowly dissolve into private family networks where royal history becomes impossible to track. That fear reportedly pushed Anne into full confrontation mode. What makes Anne's position so powerful is that she understands royal symbolism better than almost anyone alive. She knows the monarchy survives partly through visual continuity. The same tiaras, the same brooches, the same sapphires appearing generation after generation on officially recognized royal women. That continuity creates the illusion of permanence, stability, destiny. Break that chain, and suddenly the monarchy starts looking less like an institution and more like a private wealthy family dividing valuables behind closed doors. That is exactly the perception Anne reportedly feared. Because if deeply personal sapphire pieces associated with Queen Elizabeth quietly reached Camilla's untitled family circle, critics would inevitably ask a devastating question: where exactly does the monarchy end and private privilege begin? And insiders say Anne was especially furious because the sapphire suite carried emotional weight unlike almost any other collection. These were not random diamonds sitting in a vault. These were the jewels Queen Elizabeth personally redesigned, repeatedly wore during diplomatic appearances, and emotionally tied to her father, King George VI. Every sapphire carried memory. Every appearance in public reinforced Elizabeth's identity as monarch. Anne reportedly saw those pieces almost as state artifacts disguised as personal jewelry. So the idea that lesser-known supplementary sapphire pieces could allegedly drift quietly into Laura Lopes' orbit reportedly felt like a betrayal of royal continuity itself. King George VI, the palace, of course, has remained silent, completely silent, and royal silence is never meaningless. That is what keeps feeding the speculation. Because if nothing inappropriate happened, why are insiders still whispering about private interventions, returned pieces, and tensions between Anne and Camilla's inner circle? According to multiple royal commentators, the issue became so delicate because Queen Elizabeth's will remained sealed for 99 years. That means nobody outside a tiny inner network truly knows which personal items were intended for whom. And that secrecy creates the perfect breeding ground for suspicion. Meanwhile, observers began noticing another subtle pattern that only intensified the gossip. Since becoming queen consort, Camilla has repeatedly appeared in visual spaces once emotionally dominated by Elizabeth herself. The same tiaras, similar state imagery, similar jewel arrangements. To some royal loyalists, it looked respectful. To others, it looked strategic, almost like a quiet effort to absorb the late queen's symbolic aura piece by piece. And according to insiders, Anne allegedly hated that perception more than anyone, because Anne reportedly believes Elizabeth's legacy should be preserved carefully for the direct line of succession, particularly for figures like Prince William, Princess Catherine, and eventually Princess Charlotte, not absorbed sideways into unrelated private branches of the extended royal family. Princess Charlotte of Wales Prince William, that is why royal insiders now describe this confrontation as part of a much larger palace war quietly unfolding beneath the public smiles. On one side stands Anne, representing tradition, discipline, continuity, and loyalty to Elizabeth's original structure of monarchy. On the other side stands Camilla's expanding influence, subtle, strategic, and increasingly embedded into the royal machine after decades of public resistance. The Sapphire conflict allegedly became the collision point between those those two forces. And according to insiders, neither woman is known for backing down once lines are drawn. The most explosive part? Sources now claim some of the disputed Sapphire pieces are reportedly being returned quietly without public acknowledgement. No official statement, no palace confirmation, no dramatic press release, just silent movement behind royal gates. And honestly, that silence may be the loudest detail of all, because if true, it suggests Anne's intervention worked. But it also suggests the palace considered the situation serious enough to resolve privately before it exploded publicly. And imagine the tension this allegedly created inside royal circles. Camilla is the king's wife. Anne is the late queen's only daughter and arguably the most respected working royal inside the institution itself. Neither woman can publicly attack the other without damaging the monarchy. So instead, everything reportedly unfolds through icy private conversations, silent demands, controlled appearances, and carefully managed public smiles while resentment grows underneath. That kind of royal warfare is far more dangerous than screaming scandals, because the public rarely sees the real battle until years later when insiders finally start talking. What truly terrifies palace strategists is the long-term implication of this story. Because if the monarchy loses control over the symbolism attached to Queen Elizabeth's reign, it risks weakening the emotional mythology that kept the institution alive for generations. The sapphires are not just jewels, they are memory made visible. They are photographs, coronations, state dinners, historic broadcasts, the image of a queen who outlasted wars, scandals, political collapse, and cultural revolutions. Anne reportedly understands that better than anyone alive, and that is why insiders believe she was willing to risk permanent damage to her relationship with Camilla's circle to stop these pieces from quietly disappearing into private obscurity. Now the palace sits in an uncomfortable position. Publicly, nothing happened. Officially, there is no conflict. But privately, insiders claim relationships have changed forever. Trust allegedly shattered. Eyes constantly watching who wears what, who accesses which vaults, and who controls the future of Elizabeth's hidden legacy. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this: the monarchy survived because Queen Elizabeth spent 70 years making the crown feel larger than individual people. But now, after her death, the battle over her sapphires is exposing exactly how personal, emotional, and fragile royal power truly is. Because behind the tiaras, behind the ceremonies, behind the palace balconies and polished smiles, one brutal question still hangs over the royal family tonight: who truly owns the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II? And judging by the whispers still leaking from behind palace walls, that fight may be far from over.